For this video, we're going to focus exclusively on the Contracts module. Once you've added or imported all of your customers into Syncro, this is typically the most common place to go next. Contracts are where you'll set up not just your existing customer contracts, but also where you'll define custom product and labor pricing on a per-customer basis. A common theme you'll find throughout all of our training videos is the dizzying array of customization and fine-tuning options we make available to you. We fully understand that every MSP handles business differently, and we aren't there to tell you how to run yours. So we've taken great lengths to ensure that regardless of how you bill your customers, our Contracts module will be able to accommodate it. So here we're looking at a list of our current contracts, and I'll take a moment to explain everything that you're looking at here. The Contracts module isn't just for existing contracts, you can also log and track contracts you're pitching here to your prospects as well. The status bar along the top here will denote how many pending contracts are in the queue, how many completed contracts you've closed, as well as the total dollar amounts of each respective category. Below that, you'll find basic information about each contract you've created. So the first contract, here, denotes that we have an estimated value of $60,000 annually. We can see the starting and ending dates, who the primary contact is if one is assigned, along with the won-loss status. The contract's been closed, so we've flagged it as won. You'll notice on this contract, here, we don't have an estimated value or a contract end date. That's because this contract is an example of overriding pricing on a per-customer basis. Because this customer is billed on an hourly basis, there is no estimated value or contract end date. Lastly, we have a contract here in the form of an opportunity. This is a contract that's currently being pitched to a potential client, but it hasn't closed yet. The proposed pricing is for $24,000 annually, and there are several predefined statuses here you can choose from. Since we've already sent the proposal to our client and are awaiting a response, we've marked it as waiting on client. You can also notate the likelihood of a contract closing as a percentage value. We have a pretty high confidence that we're going to close this one, so we've set that value at 75%. While we're on the topic of this specific opportunity, let's drill into it further to see what this looks like. In the upper left here, you'll find the basic contact information belonging to this contract. Next to that, you'll find the information about the contract itself. This is where we set the waiting on client status as well as the likelihood of closing and the estimated value. As I mentioned before, we didn't include a starting and ending date yet as this contract is yet to close. We've also denoted our primary point of contact here as well. Service Level Agreement, which we'll get into later in this video, utilizes the selected SLA and applies that automatically to tickets when and if this contract is being utilized. Now I know that might sound like a weird statement at first. That's because we give you the option of deciding whether or not this specific contract should apply automatically to each and every ticket generated for this customer. Why would I ever want to do that? Well, again, it all comes down to flexibility in billing. Perhaps my contract states that all on-site service calls are included during business hours, but after hours are charged at your standard hourly rate. So after you create a ticket, you'll have the option to select the contract that should be associated with this ticket if the contract applies at all. If you set this option here to yes, then every ticket generated by this customer will have this specific contract applied automatically. You're also free to add a description to this contract if you like, which may be helpful if you find you have more than one person potentially working your prospects at the same time. The two sections off to the right are for overriding pricing and blacklisting products. We'll touch on those topics in greater detail later, so we'll skip these for now. Now back over to the left, you'll find the Activity section. This is to aid you in managing your communications for proposals you've sent out. You can generate emails here to your prospects and have them directly attached to the contract record. You can also add files here, which is perfect for attaching your proposals as well as future iterations of those proposals for easy review during the negotiation process. You can also add internal notes here as well and follow-up reminders as you see fit. All of that is logged below here in the Additional Information section. Here you'll find your notes in reverse chronological order. You can see that we've logged the origination point for this prospect, as well as the next steps in our proposal process. Next, we've logged that our accounting person, Mary, sent them over the proposal. We also know that Mary is taking ownership of reaching back out to the prospect in the event we don't hear back from them. Next, under Attachments, Mary added the proposal we sent so we can review it any time we need to. This is especially useful for when you've had a large number of proposals open and need a quick refresher before your next phone call or meeting with this customer. If and when this contract closes, we'll set this customer up for recurring invoices, which Syncro handles with ease. Those will show here to provide a quick link to the recurring invoice if that ever needed to be amended. Recurring invoices are beyond the scope of this video, but we fully covered them in their own dedicated video. Lastly, any emails sent from the Contracts module will automatically attach themselves to the contract record here in the Communications section. So let's take a look at a live contract. We'll start with the easiest one, which covers how to override pricing for an individual client. We're going to pay attention to these two sections over here to the right that we had skipped over previously. In the contract pricing section, you can already see that we've overridden labor for this customer. Our standard labor rate is $125 an hour, which we charge to our everyday hourly clients. However, let's say that we have an agreement with this client where we'll only charge them $100 an hour instead. You assign those prices here to as many categories of products, including labor, as you need to. In fact, we bill at a higher hourly rate for rush labor, so let's go ahead and override that pricing here. You'll see our standard rate of $160 an hour display here, and we'll go ahead and override that to charge this customer only $130 an hour instead. It really is that easy to implement customer-specific pricing. So that leaves us with the product blacklist. This is where you can add items to ensure they can't physically be sold to this customer. Again, the products you add here apply only to this customer under this specific contract. Why would you ever want to do that? Well, one example would be if your MSP gets subcontracted by another company who has implicit rules on what they can and can't sell to their contracted clients. So let's say for whatever reason this client has an agreement in place to only use a particular brand of network switches. Now you could try and remember these small exceptions on a per customer basis, but across multiple texts and a huge array of customers, it's not very realistic. So I can go here and pull up any Netgear switches we have listed as products and add them to the blacklist. Syncro will prevent any items listed here on the blacklist from being added to a ticket or to an invoice for this specific customer. So the next contract type we'll look at is all-you-can-eat contracts. For those of you unfamiliar with this term, it means that the customer pays a flat monthly rate and 100% of their support tickets and any time you or your techs spend on site is fully covered regardless of the hours consumed. These are extremely easy to set up by overriding your labor rates to 0, meaning regardless of how much time you bill against on tickets for this customer, they'll always be billed at a rate of 0. Now you'll still want to bill your time against tickets for tracking and reporting purposes, especially when you want to calculate the value of all-you-can-eat contracts over some predetermined amount of time, as well as keeping tabs on your techs to measure productivity. Now the last contract type, block hours, is handled a little differently, and that's primarily because there are several common ways these are handled by MSPs. Most block hour contracts fall into two buckets. The first is where you sell blocks of hours to your customer at a discount. So instead of charging your customer $125 an hour as needed, maybe you sell your customer a block of 10 hours at a discounted rate of $100 an hour for a total of $1,000. Let's take a look at how you'd set this one up. So for this style of block hour contract, you really don't have to do anything in the Contracts module at all. The exception to this is that if you have an arrangement with your client that offers some form of discounted labor hours that fall between your standard rate and the rate they are paying for the blocks of hours you are already selling them. Now why would you need to do this? This can be useful, for example, when the remainder of their block hours are consumed on, say, a Friday, then some issue that requires your attention crops up over the weekend when you are unable to get approval to bill for another block of hours. These labor hours are essentially a stopgap to ensure you can continue working on the client's issues prior to receiving approval to bill and allocate a new block of hours. So, let's say your customer buys a block of 10 hours. How do you tell Syncro to accommodate for that? It's pretty easy, actually. Simply head over to the customer record and modify the prepay hours field here. So now they've got credit for 10 hours. Let's take a look at how these are consumed. They have a ticket open here with an hour of billable time on it. You'll notice that it currently shows a $115 charge on the ticket, which matches our stopgap labor rate we entered into their contract. However, when I go to invoice this ticket, you'll notice that the labor rate is altered to reflect a 0 balance. The line item for the invoice is appended with the fact that your customer has consumed one of their prepaid hours. Now when I go back to their customer record and refresh it, you'll see they now have 9 hours remaining. It's as simple as that. I'd also like to mention that Syncro is smart enough where if you have some issue with this invoice and have to delete it and start over, the hours previously consumed by this invoice will automatically be added back to the customer record. One thing we strive to achieve in everything we develop is always ensuring that any piece of functionality we roll out doesn't waste your time so you can spend more of that time making money. With that in mind, we don't expect you to constantly monitor your list of block hour customers to see when they run out of hours. Like most things in Syncro, we handle that for you. We have an option in our notification center to instantly alert when any of your customers' prepaid balances reaches 0. Now I mentioned there were actually 2 types of block hour contracts. The second type is where your customer pays you a monthly rate that includes some predetermined amount of hours each month. Those hours expire at the end of each month, regardless if those hours were still remaining or not. The customer pays again the following month, those hours are refreshed back to their starting value, and the cycle continues. This contract type is handled similarly to the one I showed you prior, but these contracts typically will have in place an agreed upon amount the client will pay for hourly labor if they consume their full allotment of hours before they are refreshed the following month. So that's effectively what overriding the labor rate on their contract would account for. Now this contract type requires one additional step. Just like the previous example, we don't want you wasting your time going in each customer record and manually resetting their allotment of hours at the beginning of each month. So the way we accommodate that is through recurring invoices, and we have one set up already for this customer. Now we could have easily refreshed your client's prepaid hours the first of each month and be done with it. However, this method gives you infinitely more flexibility. Where most PSAs force you to refresh your block hours on the first of each month, with Syncro, you can literally refresh your customers' block hours whenever you want. Refresh them weekly if you want to. What about every other month? Quarterly? Biannually? The 21st of each month? We don't care. All that matters here is that you have the power to run your MSP the way you want to, not the way we want you to. Once you've named and configured your recurring invoices, the last thing you'll want to do is check this box here, which will reset this customer's prepaid hour balance back to its default state, which in our case was 10 hours. One thing that really annoys us is when software forces you to look at functionality you'll never use. For instance, what if you don't have any block hour contracts or don't intend on selling them at all? Do you really have to look at this prepay hours field every time you view a customer record? Thankfully, no. In our admin settings, under Customer Preferences, you have the option to enable or disable our prepay hours tracking feature. Note that if you do intend to use this functionality, this option is unchecked by default, so you'll want to be sure to enable it prior to setting up any contracts that will require this feature. The last thing we'll want to go over is the service level agreements, which can be found here in the Contracts module. Service level agreements, or SLAs, are an agreement between you and your customer, often found in the language of the contract your customers will sign, that details your expected response time to tickets. This is often broken into 2 categories: your response time to any customer comments or questions, and your resolution time for resolving the ticket in its entirety. So in this example, we are contractually obligated to respond to customer tickets within 2 business hours. We are also obligated to resolve tickets within 24 business hours of receiving them. You can also automatically assign any of your techs to this customer's tickets, which is nice if it's a very large customer that has their own dedicated tech within your company or requires a higher tier tech than most other customers. You can also choose to escalate tickets that breach your SLA, meaning your techs haven't responded to resolve the ticket in the required amount of time. Once you have your SLA configured, you can then add it to any number of contracts here. This ensures that all tickets open for this customer will adhere to this designated SLA. So that's our Contracts module. Extremely powerful, extremely flexible, and most importantly, it can easily be form-fit into any MSP's billing flow, no matter how unique or complex that may be.